Part 2. On the way to marry his fiancée, the millionaire saw his ex at a bus stop, holding twins who looked exactly like him. Jace McLaughlin hadn't checked his email in 3 days, not because he was busy, but because he was trying to learn how to make grilled cheese without burning the bread, trying to remember school pickup times, trying to exist in a life that didn't revolve around meetings and deadlines. The phone buzzed while he was sitting on the floor helping Charlie color inside the lines. It buzzed again, then a third time. Estelle glanced over from the kitchen. "You might want to see that." Jace hesitated, then picked up the phone. The subject line alone made his stomach tighten. Global expansion role. Immediate response requested. It was from his former board, not a recruiter, not a suggestion, an invitation. He opened the message slowly, as if speed might make it more real. They wanted him back, not as a consultant, not as a temporary advisor, but as the face of a new international project. Offices in 3 countries, total control, a contract worth more than anything he had ever signed before. The kind of opportunity people dream about and never receive. The kind of offer that only comes once. Jace stared at the screen, the numbers blurring into meaning. From the couch, Leo looked up. "Dad, are you listening?" Jace didn't answer right away, because in that single moment, the world he had walked away from was calling him home, and the life he had just found was sitting right in front of him, waiting for him to decide which one mattered more. Jace didn't reply to the email, not right away. He locked his phone and set it face down on the table, as if hiding it might stop the meaning from spreading through the room. Charlie slid her drawing toward him, proud of the crooked house she had colored in bright purple. "Is this good?" she asked. "It's perfect," Jace said automatically. But his mind was no longer in the living room. That night, after the twins were asleep, he opened the message again. This time, he read every line carefully. The role required relocation, not temporary travel, not short visits, a full move, new headquarters, new time zone, new life. They expected him in another city within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. 2 weeks ago, he was still trying to learn which cereal Leo preferred. 2 weeks ago, he was still apologizing for 10 years of absence. 2 weeks ago, he was finally starting to feel like he belonged somewhere. And now, the same world that once took everything from him was offering him everything again, on one condition. Leave. He walked into the bedroom where Estelle was folding laundry. "They want me to move," he said quietly. Her hands paused mid-fold. "How far?" she asked without looking up. "Across the country, maybe longer. It's a big role." She nodded slowly, placing the shirt down. Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. Something old, something careful. "So it's happening again," she said. Jace opened his mouth to explain, but the truth didn't need decoration. The offer wasn't just about money. It was about distance, and distance had already taught them both what it cost. Jace lay awake long after the apartment went quiet. The twins' door was half open, a sliver of light from the hallway falling across the floor. He could hear Leo's slow breathing, Charlie's faint mumbling as she shifted in her sleep. These sounds were new to him, not noises, anchors. For years, his nights had been filled with different things, late calls from overseas, glowing screens, numbers that never rested. He used to fall asleep thinking about growth, expansion, next steps. Now he fell asleep thinking about school lunches and whether Charlie preferred apples or oranges. His phone sat on the nightstand, the email still open. The contract amount alone could change everything. Private schools, bigger home, security that most families only imagined. He could give them more. But would he be there to give it? Jace walked into the living room and stood in front of the window. The city lights stretched endlessly below, the same view that once made him feel powerful. Now it just felt distant. Estelle had built a life without excess. No designer furniture, no luxury cars, just consistency, warm meals, a presence that didn't disappear. He had built a life with everything else and lost everything that mattered. The offer promised status. The family offered meaning. One gave him recognition. The other gave him a name spoken softly at bedtime. Jace finally understood something no boardroom ever taught him. Wealth adds to your life, but presence defines it. And for the first time in his career, the question wasn't how much he could gain. It was how much he was willing to lose, again. Have you ever worked so hard for something that, when you finally got it, you weren't sure you wanted it anymore? Not because it wasn't impressive, not because it didn't pay well, but because the life you built to reach it no longer fit the person you became along the way. Jace had chased this kind of opportunity his entire adult life. The kind that put your name on conference stages and your face in industry articles. The kind people describe as the moment everything changes. And now it was sitting in his inbox again. Only this time there were 2 small backpacks by the door, 2 lunchboxes in the fridge, Two voices that called him Dad without hesitation, without knowing how close he came to disappearing from their world twice. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've felt the pull between what looks successful and what feels right. Between being admired and being needed. Between climbing higher and staying close. Jace wasn't choosing between good and bad. He was choosing between two good things that could not exist in the same place. A future built on ambition, and a present built on connection. And the hardest part? Both required sacrifice. The only difference was what, and who, he would have to sacrifice this time. Before this story goes any further, I want to welcome you to Mr. Williams' Storytime, a place where we don't just tell stories. We explore the real choices people face when life pulls them in opposite directions. If this moment is already making you think, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in Jace's journey. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If you were in Jace's position right now, offered everything you once dreamed of, but asked to leave the people you just found, what would you choose? Would you take the opportunity and trust love to wait, or would you stay and let success look different this time? Drop your thoughts below, share the story with someone who needs it, and stay with me, because Jace's next decision will shape every life involved. Jace hadn't heard that ringtone in months, not the default one on his phone, the private one, the one assigned to a number he never deleted, even after telling himself he had moved on. He was standing in line at the grocery store with Leo, arguing about whether chocolate cereal counted as breakfast, when the sound cut through the noise of carts and chatter. His hand froze around the basket handle. Leo looked up. "Why did you stop?" Jace swallowed. "I forgot something." He stepped aside and checked the screen. Marcus Hale, former partner, former mentor, former gateway to everything he once built his life around. Jace let it ring. Then it rang again. That night, after the twins were asleep and Estelle was in the shower, he finally returned the call. "Jace Mac Laughlin," Marcus said, his voice as smooth as ever. "I was starting to think you'd vanished." "I kinda did," Jace replied. Marcus laughed lightly. "Yeah, well, the industry noticed." There was a pause. Then Marcus said the words Jace had pretended he would never hear again. "We're rebuilding, and we want you at the center of it." Jace leaned back against the kitchen counter, eyes drifting toward the hallway where two small nightlights glowed under the twins' door. "Why me?" he asked. "Because no one does what you do," Marcus replied, "and because, honestly, the story of you stepping away only made people more curious." Jace closed his eyes. He had walked away from power, but power hadn't walked away from him. Jace didn't sleep much that night, not because of fear, but because of memory. Marcus's voice kept replaying in his head, calm and confident, the same tone that once convinced him to work through weekends, to skip birthdays, to postpone everything meaningful for just one more deal. The next morning, Jace woke up to 3 missed calls, all from numbers he recognized, words he hadn't heard since he traded boardrooms for bedtime stories. He sat at the kitchen table while Estelle packed lunches for the twins. "You're quiet today," she said. "Just tired," Jace replied, but his phone buzzed again, and again, and again. By noon, his inbox looked like it had been waiting for him to return. Invitations to private meetings, conference appearances, offers to catch up over expensive dinners. It felt like stepping into a room he once owned, a room that still had his name written on the door. Jace stared at the screen, feeling something dangerous surface inside him. Not greed, recognition. The old version of himself, the one who felt alive only when he was being chased, praised, needed, was waking up. And for the first time since becoming a father, Jace felt the pull of a life that asked nothing from him except ambition. Estelle noticed it in the small things first. Jace started checking his phone during breakfast, not obviously, just quick glances, like he was making sure no one was watching. He stayed up later than usual, sitting on the edge of the couch with the screen dimmed, replying to messages that didn't include her. One evening, Leo asked him to help with a puzzle. "In a minute," Jace said, eyes still on the phone. The minute stretched into 10. Estelle didn't say anything. She simply finished the puzzle with Leo, smiling and offering encouragement the way she always had. But when she passed Jace in the hallway later, she paused. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied quickly. "Just work stuff." She nodded, but her stomach tightened. Work stuff. Those 2 words had once explained every absence, every missed dinner, every promise that arrived late or not at all. That night, after the twins were asleep, Estelle stood in the doorway watching Jace type. Not with anger, with recognition. She had seen this version of him before, focused, distant, already halfway somewhere else. And the most painful part wasn't the fear that he might leave again. It was the fear that he might not even realize he was already starting to. Jace started wearing his watch again, the expensive one, the one he hadn't touched since moving into Estelle's apartment, The one that reminded him of flights, meetings, and schedules that never made room for anything personal. He told himself it was just habit. But habits have a way of revealing truth. He caught himself checking the time during dinner, mentally calculating calls he could return, people he needed to follow up with. His posture changed too, straighter, more alert, like he was preparing for something invisible. One afternoon, while Leo and Charlie were coloring at the table, Jace opened his laptop for the first time in weeks. "Dad, are you playing?" Charlie asked. "Just for a minute," he said. "I need to send something." The screen filled with charts, projections, market data, a language he used to speak fluently. His fingers moved faster than his thoughts, responding to messages, scheduling virtual meetings, drafting ideas that had once defined him. And for a moment, he felt good, not peaceful. The feeling scared him, because it was familiar, because it reminded him how easy it was to become someone who lived for achievement instead of presence. Jace looked up and realized both kids were watching him. Not with complaint, with quiet curiosity. And in that silence he felt something dangerous settle in his chest. The world he left behind wasn't pulling him back. He was walking toward it on his own. The warning didn't come from Marcus. It didn't come from an email or a contract or a headline. It came from Leo. Jace was standing by the door, slipping on his watch again, when Leo looked up from the couch. "Are you going to work now?" he asked. Jace paused. "No, buddy, I'm just checking something." Leo nodded slowly, then asked a question that didn't sound big, but landed like weight. "Is that what you said before you left the first time?" The room went still. Estelle froze in the kitchen. Charlie looked between them, sensing something had shifted even if she didn't understand why. Jace felt the air leave his chest. He knelt in front of Leo. "What do you mean?" Leo shrugged. "Mom said you had to go work somewhere far, and then you didn't come back for a long time." Jace opened his mouth, but no explanation formed, because there was no version of the truth that didn't hurt. Estelle finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "They don't need details," she said. "They just need to know if you're here." Jace looked at his son, at his daughter, at the woman who had carried everything alone once already. And for the first time since the offer arrived, the situation stopped feeling like a career decision. It felt like a pattern trying to repeat itself, not in headlines, not in contracts, but in the eyes of a child who was already preparing for goodbye, just in case. Jace slowly removed the watch from his wrist and placed it on the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The choice had just become real. Estelle told herself she was over it, over the waiting, over the unanswered calls, over the version of herself who used to sit on the edge of the bed, pretending not to hear the silence. She had built a life that didn't depend on anyone's promises, a routine that didn't collapse when someone was late, a strength that came from knowing she could survive whatever came next. But fear doesn't disappear just because you grow stronger. It changes shape. That night, after Jace fell asleep, Estelle lay awake staring at the ceiling, the old memories returning without invitation, the tiny apartment, the suitcase in the middle of the room. She remembered how she had smiled back then, how she had nodded, how she had believed that love alone could keep distance from becoming permanent, and how wrong she had been. Estelle rolled onto her side and listened to Jace's breathing beside her, steady, present, real, yet her chest still felt tight, because she had heard this rhythm before, the early signs, the subtle shifts, the way ambition slowly replaced closeness without ever announcing itself. Jace hadn't said he was leaving, but he hadn't said he was staying either, and Estelle knew something painful from experience. Sometimes people don't leave all at once, they leave in pieces. Estelle began doing what she had promised herself she would never do again. She stopped asking questions, not because she didn't care, but because she was afraid of the answers. Afraid that if she asked where Jace was going, or who he was talking to, or why he seemed distracted, she would hear echoes of the past she had worked so hard to move beyond. So she chose silence. When Jace stayed up late, she went to bed first. When he checked his phone at breakfast, she focused on the twins. When he said work stuff, she nodded and let the words pass without challenge. On the surface, everything looked peaceful. But peace built on avoidance is fragile. She noticed herself holding back small things, worries about bills, stories from her day, thoughts she used to share freely. Not out of anger, out of instinct. A quiet voice inside her whispered, "Don't lean too much, don't depend too fast." One evening, while folding laundry, she realized she was separating Jace's clothes from the rest. Not intentionally, her hands just did it. That's when it hit her. She wasn't pulling away because she wanted distance. She was pulling away because she was preparing for it. Estelle had learned how to carry fear quietly. Not the dramatic kind that shows up in tears or arguments, but the steady kind that settles in your chest and changes how you breathe without asking permission. She watched Jace move around the apartment, laughing with the twins, helping with homework, washing dishes. From the outside, It looked like everything she had once wished for. And that's what scared her. Because last time, it had looked like this too. Not at the end. At the beginning. Back then, Jace had still kissed her forehead before leaving. He had still called her on his lunch breaks. He had still promised that distance wouldn't change them. Until it did. So now, when she saw him smiling at his phone, when she noticed him thinking instead of listening, her mind didn't go to jealousy. It went to preparation. She started imagining life without him again. Not because she wanted to, but because her heart didn't want to be caught off guard twice. Could she raise the twins alone again? Would it break her the same way? Maybe not, but it would still hurt. And the most painful truth she refused to say out loud was this. She didn't fear Jace leaving. She feared believing again that he wouldn't. Estelle found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She began planning without Jace in mind. Not big plans. Not dramatic ones. Just quiet, practical thoughts. Budget she could manage alone. School schedules she didn't need to adjust. Backup options that existed only in her head. It wasn't bitterness. It was instinct. When you've learned how to survive on your own, part of you never forgets the path back to that version of life. You keep it nearby just in case. Jace noticed she was quieter, but he mistook it for peace. She still laughed with the twins, still cooked dinner, still asked how his day was. But her laughter ended sooner. Her questions stayed safer. Her words no longer carried expectations. One evening, Jace wrapped his arms around her from behind while she washed dishes. "I missed this," he said softly. Estelle smiled, but instead of leaning into him, she froze for half a second, long enough to remind herself not to attach too deeply to moments that might not last. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the way his voice sounded now, grounded and sincere, but memory stood between them like an invisible wall. Love was asking her to open up again. Experience was telling her to stay ready, and so Estelle stood in the middle of both, loving a man who had returned, while quietly protecting herself from the possibility that he might one day leave again. There was one question that lived in Estelle's chest. It surfaced when she watched Jace checking his phone, when she saw him slip the watch back onto his wrist, when she noticed how his eyes sometimes drifted elsewhere during conversations. The question was simple. Are you staying? But Estelle never said it, because she knew the risk of asking. If he answered yes, she might relax, she might lean in, she might believe. And belief, after everything she had endured, felt more dangerous than doubt. If he answered no, she wasn't sure she had the strength to hear it again. So she carried the question silently, letting it shape her choices without ever giving it a voice. She stopped making plans too far ahead, stopped imagining holidays. Instead, she lived in the present, not because it was enough, but because it was safer. Jace thought she was calm. He didn't know she was holding her breath, waiting for a future she didn't dare ask about. Leo noticed before anyone said anything out loud, not in big ways, in patterns. Jace used to walk him to school every morning. Now some days he said, "I'll catch you later, buddy." Jace used to sit on the couch during cartoons. Now he sat at the table with his laptop open, fingers moving while his eyes followed numbers instead of characters on the screen. Leo didn't complain. He just watched. One afternoon, Leo sat beside Charlie on the floor, building towers with wooden blocks. Jace was across the room, on a call, speaking in a voice Leo didn't recognize, faster, sharper, full of words that didn't belong in their apartment. "Who is he talking to?" Charlie whispered. Leo shrugged. "Work people." Charlie stacked another block. "Does work need him a lot?" Leo didn't answer right away. He had learned something about grown-ups. They say they're staying, but sometimes their bodies start leaving first. Leo looked up at his father, then back at the tower. He placed one more block on top. It wobbled and fell. Charlie asked the question while they were eating dinner, not during one of Jace's phone calls, not when he was rushing out the door, but in the quiet moment when everyone was finally sitting together, forks moving slowly, the television turned off like Estelle preferred. "Dad," Charlie said softly, "do you still live here?" The room stilled. Jace looked up surprised. "Of course I do." Charlie nodded, then tilted her head. "Then why do you always look like you're going somewhere?" Estelle froze mid-bite. Leo looked at his sister, then at Jace. Jace opened his mouth, then closed it again, because the question wasn't about geography. It was about attention. It was about presence. It was about the way his body sat in one place while his mind traveled to another. "I just have some things to think about," Jace said carefully. Charlie accepted that answer the way children often do, not because it fully explains, but because they want to trust. She smiled faintly and returned to her food. But Leo didn't. No one spoke. Even the sound of forks had stopped. And in that silence, Jace realized something devastating. But no one had ever taught him how to convince his own children that he wasn't already halfway gone. Later that night, Leo couldn't sleep. Jace found him sitting on the edge of his bed, legs swinging gently, eyes fixed on the floor like he was holding onto a thought too heavy to lie down with. "Hey," Jace said softly. "Everything okay?" Leo nodded, then shook his head. Jace sat beside him. "Want to talk about it?" Leo took a breath. "Mom says you came back because you wanted to be with us." "I did," Jace replied immediately. Leo looked up at him. "Then why does it feel like you're practicing leaving?" The words weren't loud. They weren't angry. They were careful. Jace felt something tighten inside his chest. "I'm not practicing anything," he said gently. Leo shrugged. "That's what Mom said last time, too." The room felt smaller. Jace searched for the right explanation, the kind that could protect a child without lying, but every version he formed sounded like a promise he wasn't fully sure he could keep. Leo continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you rich, or are you ours?" Jace stared at him, not because he didn't understand the question, but because he did. And suddenly every contract, every meeting, every number on that glowing screen felt meaningless compared to the quiet fear in his son's eyes. Jace placed a hand over Leo's. "I want to be yours," he said. Leo nodded slowly. "But you wanted to be rich before too," he replied. Jace didn't leave Leo's room right away. He sat there in the dim light, listening to his son's breathing slowly return to normal, watching the way sleep finally softened the tension in his small shoulders. But Jace couldn't sleep. He walked back into the living room where Estelle was folding laundry, her movements slow, thoughtful. "He asked you, didn't he?" she said quietly, without looking up. Jace nodded. "He thinks I'm already leaving." Estelle paused, then placed a folded shirt on the couch. "He's not wrong to feel that way," she said. Not accusing, just honest. Jace leaned against the wall, rubbing his face. "I never meant to make them feel insecure again." "I know," Estelle replied, "but intentions don't always match impact." They stood in silence, the kind that wasn't angry but heavy with things neither wanted to say too loudly. Estelle finally spoke. "I spent years teaching them that people don't disappear, that even when life is hard, you stay connected, that love means showing up even when it's inconvenient. And now?" he asked. "And now," she said gently, "they feel you drifting, not because you're gone, but because part of you is already somewhere else." Jace closed his eyes. He had wanted success again, but he hadn't expected the cost to show up so quickly, or so clearly, in the quiet space between his children's questions and his inability to answer them. Jace stood alone on the balcony long after everyone else had gone to bed. The city lights below looked the same as they always had, busy, bright, full of movement and ambition. Once that view had filled him with energy. It had made him feel like he was part of something important. Now it just felt familiar in the wrong way. He thought about Leo's question again. "Are you rich, or are you ours?" It wasn't just a child's question. It was a mirror. Jace finally saw the pattern he had spent years denying. He didn't leave because he didn't love. He left because he loved the feeling of being needed by the world more than the feeling of being needed by people. The world applauded him. Family required him. The world rewarded ambition. Family demanded presence. And the terrifying truth was this: no one was forcing him to leave again. Not Marcus, not the board, not the offer. He was doing what he had always done, reaching for the version of himself that felt impressive, even when it meant stepping away from the version that felt real. Jace closed his eyes and imagined the future if he said yes. More headlines, more influence, more money, and 2 children slowly learning how to stop asking if he was staying. That was the moment everything shifted, not because he suddenly became perfect, but because he finally understood the cost of repeating the same choice with a different excuse. For the first time in his life, Jace didn't feel proud of being wanted by the world. He felt afraid of being lost by his family. Jace told himself it was harmless, just a conversation, just listening, just staying informed. That's what he said when Marcus suggested a video call. "You don't have to commit to anything," Marcus had written. "Just hear what we're building." Jace almost deleted the message. Almost. Instead, he waited until the twins were at school and Estelle was at work, then sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. The screen flickered. Marcus appeared, smiling the same confident smile that once convinced Jace to take risks that changed his entire life. "Look at you," Marcus said. "You look grounded." Jace forced a small laugh, something like that. The call lasted longer than planned. They talked strategy, vision, global markets, leadership roles. The language slid back into Jace's mind like muscle memory, and for a moment, he forgot where he was. He forgot about lunchboxes in the fridge, forgot about homework schedules, forgot about a little boy asking if he was rich or theirs. When the call ended, Jace sat in silence staring at his reflection in the dark screen. He had promised himself he wouldn't step back in, but he had, not with his feet, with his attention. Jace didn't tell Estelle about the call, not because he wanted to hide, but because he didn't want to explain something he hadn't fully admitted to himself yet. That afternoon he picked up the twins from school later than usual. "Sorry," he said, breathless, as Leo climbed into the car. Traffic was bad. Leo nodded, but Charlie glanced at the clock on the dashboard. She didn't say anything. She just held Sonny a little tighter. That evening, Jace stayed up after everyone went to bed. He told himself he was organizing old files, clearing his inbox, tying up loose ends from a past life, but the truth sat open on his screen. New proposals, meeting schedules. He caught himself smiling at an email that addressed him as Chief Vision Officer. Too good. When Estelle walked into the living room, she paused. "You're working again?" she asked gently. "Just a little," Jace replied. "It's nothing serious. I just don't want to fall behind." Fall behind what? Behind a life he had already chosen to leave? Estelle nodded and went to bed without arguing. And that silence, the one where she didn't fight, didn't question, didn't push, unsettled Jace more than any confrontation ever could. Because deep down, he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't being forced back into the world he escaped. He was slowly giving himself permission to return. Jace had promised Leo he would come, not vaguely, not with a "we'll see." He had promised. It was Leo's first school presentation, a small one, nothing dramatic. Parents were invited to sit on tiny chairs in a classroom decorated with uneven drawings and crooked letters taped to the walls. Leo reminded him that morning. "You're coming, right?" Jace smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." At noon, Jace's phone buzzed. "Marcus, quick call. Urgent update from investors." Jace glanced at the time. He had 20 minutes before he needed to leave. 5 minutes, he told himself, just 5. Then numbers, projections, excitement, the familiar rush. By the time Jace looked at the clock again, it was already too late. He arrived at the school to find parents standing up, children gathering their bags, teachers stacking papers. Leo stood near the door, eyes scanning the hallway. When he saw Jace, his face lit up, then fell. "You came after," Leo said quietly. Jace knelt in front of him. "I'm so sorry, buddy. Something important came up." Leo nodded, trying to be understanding in the way only children can be. "It's okay," he said. "Mom came." And somehow, that hurt more than if Leo had cried. Because Jace knew the truth. Something important hadn't come up. He had chosen something else. Estelle knew before Jace said anything. She saw it in Leo's face the moment he walked through the door. The way his shoulders slumped, the way he handed over his school paper without excitement, the way he went straight to his room instead of talking. "How was the presentation?" she asked gently. Leo shrugged. It was okay. That wasn't Leo. Estelle looked at Jace. "Did you make it?" Just for a second, but that second said everything. "I got there late," he admitted. "I had a call I couldn't skip." Estelle closed her eyes, not in anger, in recognition. The words were different. The excuses were softer. But the result was exactly the same. "You promised him," she said quietly. "I know," Jace replied. "I didn't mean—" "I know you didn't mean to," Estelle interrupted. "You never do." She turned back to the kitchen, hands shaking slightly as she rinsed a cup that was already clean. "This is how it started last time," she continued, her voice steady but tired. Not with big decisions, not with goodbye speeches, with small moments that kept getting pushed aside. Jace stood there, unable to argue, because he could feel it too. The same rhythm, the same justifications, the same slow shift of priorities. History wasn't repeating loudly, it was repeating quietly, in missed school chairs, in delayed pickups, in a little boy learning how to lower his expectations. And for the first time, Estelle didn't feel shocked. She felt afraid of how familiar it all felt. Jace sat alone in the living room long after everyone had gone to bed. The school paper Leo had handed him lay folded on the table, crayon drawings, a few misspelled words, a title written in shaky letters, "My Family." Jace opened it carefully, and there was him, drawn smaller than the others, standing slightly to the side. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't dramatic, it was honest. Jace felt something tighten in his chest. He thought about the call, about how easily he had said yes, about how natural it felt to choose business again, even when he knew what it cost the first time. He walked into the bathroom and stared at his reflection. Same face, same posture, same hunger in his eyes, different excuses, same outcome. "I'm doing it again," he whispered, not leaving yet, but preparing to, and that was the most dangerous part, because it didn't look like failure. It looked like progress. It looked like responsibility. It looked like just one more opportunity, but in reality, it was the same old trade. Presence for praise, family for relevance, connection for control. Jace pressed his hands against the sink and closed his eyes. He finally understood something that no success coach, no mentor, no achievement had ever taught him. The hardest version of growth isn't building something new. It's refusing to become the person you already know you can be, when that person costs you the people you love. The turning point didn't arrive with an argument. It didn't come through a dramatic phone call or a public confrontation. It came on a Wednesday afternoon, disguised as something simple. Charlie had a school art showcase, not a performance, not a competition, just a small event where children taped drawings to the classroom walls and invited parents to walk around and look. Jace had written it into his calendar himself. 3:30 p.m., Charlie's art day. He even set a reminder. At 3:10, his phone buzzed. Board update. Immediate review required. Jace looked at the message, then at the time. 20 minutes. I'll just read it quickly, he thought. The document was long, detailed, urgent, full of numbers that pulled his focus the way they always had. By the time he looked up again, it was 4:02. He stood up so fast the chair tipped over. Traffic was heavy. The parking lot was full. When he finally reached the classroom, parents were already leaving. Charlie stood near the wall, carefully peeling her drawing off the board. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. Jace's chest tightened. I did, he replied. Just a little late. Charlie nodded. That's okay. She held up the stuffed bear. Jace looked at the drawing in her hands. It showed 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one small. There was space for a 4th, but it was empty. And in that empty space, Jace finally saw the future he was creating. Not with big decisions, but with small moments he kept choosing to miss. Jace didn't say anything on the drive home. Charlie hummed softly in the back seat, holding Sonny, unaware that anything had gone wrong. To her, her father had shown up. That was enough. But for Jace, the silence inside the car felt heavier than any argument. At a red light, he glanced at her through the rearview mirror. You did great today, he said. Not always, not reliably, not fully, eventually. Jace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That night, after the twins were asleep, Jace sat alone on the edge of the bed. Estelle stood near the window, folding clothes, her movements slow and careful. I missed it, he said. She didn't ask what. I know, she replied. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. I keep telling myself I'm different now, that I've changed, but I'm still choosing the same things when it matters. Estelle finally turned toward him. You don't have to be perfect, she said. But you do have to be honest about who you are becoming. Jace lowered his head into his hands. I don't want to become that man again, he said quietly. Then don't, Estelle replied. Not harsh, not dramatic, just true. Jace felt something inside him give way. Not his ambition, his denial. For the first time, he stopped defending his actions, stopped explaining, stopped hiding behind good intentions. He finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding since the offer arrived. He wasn't afraid of losing the opportunity. He was afraid of losing himself to it. Again. Jace didn't open his laptop the next morning. That alone felt strange. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, staring at nothing in particular, while the twins ate cereal and argued about whose turn it was to choose the music. For the first time in weeks, his phone stayed silent. No calls, no emails, no reminders. And yet, his mind was louder than ever. He kept seeing Charlie's drawing. The empty space, not a mistake, not an accident, a reflection. Jace asked himself a question he had avoided for most of his life. If I keep choosing this path, who do I become? Not the man on paper, not the man in headlines, the man in memory, the one his children would describe when someone asked about their father. Would they say he was successful, or would they say he was there? Jace closed his eyes and imagined 2 futures. In one, he accepted the offer. New city, bigger office, more influence. His name returned to places that made him feel important. In the other, he stayed. Same apartment, same school runs, same simple routines that didn't impress anyone but meant everything to 2 small lives. One future made him admired, the other made him necessary. And for the first time, Jace understood the difference. One built an image, the other built a legacy. The question was no longer whether he could handle the sacrifice. It was whether he finally valued the right thing enough to make it. The phone rang while Jace was tying Leo's shoes. Not a message, not an email, a direct call. Jace glanced at the screen. Marcus. For a moment his body reacted before his mind. The old instinct, the reflex to answer. The familiar sense that something important was waiting on the other side. Leo looked up. Is that work? Jace hesitated. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned the phone face down on the counter. Are you going to pick up? Leo asked. Jace finished tying the knot and stood. No, he replied. Leo blinked. Why not? Jace smiled faintly. Because I'm busy. Doing what? Leo asked. Jace placed his hands on his son's shoulders. Being here. The phone stopped ringing, not because the world stopped calling, but because for the first time Jace chose not to answer. Jace stood in the hallway long after the phone went silent. Not relieved, not proud, just still. Because not answering a call was easy. Living with what that choice meant was the real part. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Jay sat across from Estelle at the kitchen table. No laptop, no phone, just 2 cups of tea and a conversation he had avoided since everything started shifting again. "They're offering me the role," he said quietly. "Full control, big expansion. It's everything I used to want." Estelle didn't interrupt. "They want me to move. New city, new headquarters. It's not temporary." She nodded once, not surprised. Jace took a breath. "I almost said yes. I was already halfway there." Estelle met his eyes. "Almost." Jace swallowed. "I realized something after today, after missing Charlie's showcase, after Leo's questions. I keep telling myself I'm different, but I don't prove it when it matters." Estelle's voice stayed calm. "So what are you going to do?" Jace looked down at his hands, then back up. "I'm stepping away from it, all of it. Not just this role, the whole version of my life that keeps asking me to disappear in order to succeed." Estelle's breath caught. "I'm going to sell my stake, step down from leadership, take a smaller role if I need to, something local, something that doesn't take me away from them." The words felt heavy as they left his mouth. Not because he wasn't sure, but because he finally was. "I don't want to be admired," Jace said softly. "I want to be remembered by the people who actually know me." Estelle stared at him for a long moment, not searching for emotion, not waiting for promises, just listening. Then she nodded. "This time," she said, "you didn't just say it, you chose it." And in that quiet kitchen, without applause or headlines, Jace made the most important deal of his life. Not with the world, with himself. The announcement didn't happen in public. There was no press conference, no dramatic resignation speech. It happened in a quiet boardroom with people who had known Jace since before his name meant anything. Marcus sat across from him, arms folded, studying his face like he was waiting for a punchline. "So you're serious," Marcus said. "You're walking away." Again, Jace nodded. "Not walking away. Letting go." Marcus laughed softly. "You realize what you're giving up, right? Influence, legacy, everything you built." Jace looked around the room. The long table, the glass walls, the city's skyline behind them. "I built something," he said, "but it wasn't a life. It was a machine that needed me to disappear in order to keep running." One of the board members leaned forward. "You're at the peak of your career. People would kill to be where you are." Jace smiled faintly. "I already did kill for it, just slowly. By missing everything that mattered." Silence followed. Marcus shook his head. "So what now, you retire? Become a motivational speaker?" Jace stood. "I go home," he said. Not as a joke, not as a slogan, as a decision. He signed the papers that afternoon, sold his controlling stake, stepped down from leadership, chose a role that didn't require flights, headlines, or sacrifice disguised as ambition. As he walked out of the building for the last time, Jace didn't feel victorious. He felt lighter, like someone who finally stopped carrying a version of himself that no longer fit. Jace expected questions. He expected disbelief. He even expected anger. What he didn't expect was how quickly people tried to convince him he was making a mistake. His phone filled with messages the moment the decision became official. Former colleagues, investors, old friends who had disappeared once he stepped out of the spotlight and now suddenly remembered his number. "You're throwing everything away. Take a break, sure, but don't quit. You'll regret this in a year." One message stood out, from Marcus. "You didn't leave the game. You just lost your edge." Jace read it twice. Then he set the phone down. That evening, he walked the twins to the park instead of joining a networking dinner he had been invited to out of habit. Leo raced ahead toward the swings. Charlie lagged behind, holding his hand. "Dad," she said, "are you going to work tomorrow?" Jace smiled. "No, I'm taking you to school." Her face lit up in a way no promotion ever had. In that moment, Jace realized something the world would never applaud. The people who thought he had lost everything didn't see what he had gained. They measured success by how many people wanted him. He was learning to measure it by how many people needed him. The numbers didn't disappear just because Jace changed his mind. They followed him home, not on glowing screens in conference rooms, but on quiet papers spread across the kitchen table. Contracts he had signed out of, shares he had sold, accounts that no longer held what they once did. For the first time in his adult life, Jace looked at his finances and felt something close to uncertainty. Not fear, just reality. He no longer had unlimited access to private flights, luxury hotels, or assistants who solved problems before he noticed them. The safety net was still there, but it was smaller, more human. He traded a penthouse for a modest home closer to the twin school. He sold the second car, canceled memberships he had never used. When Estelle saw the new budget written in his handwriting, she looked at him carefully. "You're really doing this," she said. Jace nodded. "I want my life to match my choices." That night, He cooked dinner instead of ordering in. The food wasn't perfect. The kitchen got messy. Leo complained about vegetables. Charlie spilled juice. And Jace had never felt more present in his own life. He had let go of millions. But for the first time, he knew exactly what he was keeping. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the silence. Jace woke up one Monday morning with nowhere urgent to be. No inbox full of red flags. No assistants waiting for instructions. No calendar stacked with meetings that made him feel important. Just sunlight through the curtains and the sound of Leo arguing with Charlie about whose turn it was to feed the cat. For years, Jace had introduced himself with titles. Founder, CEO, investor. Words that told people exactly how to treat him. Now when someone asked what he did, he paused. "I'm figuring that out," he said once, and surprised himself by meaning it. He started volunteering at the twins' school, helping with after-school programs. The first time a teacher asked him to move chairs instead of make decisions, his instinct was to give instructions. Then he stopped and lifted the chairs. He applied for a local consulting role that paid a fraction of what he once earned. No corner office, no prestige, just work that ended at 5 and didn't follow him home. The first day, he walked into the small office and no one recognized his name. No one cared about his past. They only cared if he showed up on time. Jace went home that evening exhausted in a way he hadn't felt in years. Not mentally drained, physically present, and something inside him shifted. For the first time, his value wasn't measured by how impressive he was. It was measured by how useful he was to the life he actually lived. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, not during a big moment, not during a celebration, not during anything that looked important. Jace was standing in the kitchen, helping Charlie with a math worksheet while Leo built a model airplane on the table. Estelle was on the phone with a neighbor, laughing about something small and ordinary. Jace looked around and felt something unfamiliar. Nothing was urgent. Nothing was pulling him away. Nothing needed him anywhere else. And for the first time in his adult life, that didn't feel empty. It felt full. Charlie tugged his sleeve. "Dad, is this right?" Jace leaned over. "Almost. You just need to move that number." She smiled when she got it. The kind of smile that doesn't perform for anyone, doesn't seek approval, just exists because someone stayed long enough to help. Leo looked up from his airplane. "Can you come to my game tomorrow? I think I might score." Jace didn't check a calendar. "I'll be there," he said. And he knew he meant it. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Estelle sat beside him on the couch. "You seem lighter," she said. Jace thought for a moment. "I think I spent years trying to become someone impressive, and I finally became someone present." Estelle rested her head on his shoulder. Jace didn't feel like he had lost anything. He felt like he had stopped losing himself. The world had offered him power. He had chosen peace. And peace, he realized, was the only success that never asked him to leave. Jace's days no longer started with alarms. They started with noise. The kind that didn't come from notifications, but from footsteps in the hallway, from cereal bowls clinking against the table, from Charlie singing songs she made up on the spot, and Leo arguing that they were off-key. At first, Jace didn't know what to do with the space in his mornings. He kept checking the time out of habit, expecting to feel late for something important. But there was nowhere he had to rush to, no meeting waiting, no voice on the other end asking for decisions. Just breakfast, just backpacks, just Estelle handing him a mug and saying, "You're on school drop-off today." He walked the twins to the car instead of checking headlines. He listened to Leo's stories about friends instead of earnings reports. He learned Charlie's favorite color had changed again, from purple to yellow, and realized he had never noticed things like that before. When he dropped them off, he didn't sit in the car scrolling through emails. He sat there for a moment, watching them walk into the building, not because he was afraid of losing them, but because, for once, he wasn't afraid of missing them. Jace had spent most of his life building a future. Now he was finally living in a present he never scheduled, and it felt more successful than anything he had ever planned. Jace used to measure progress with numbers, revenue charts, growth percentages, market predictions that told him whether he was ahead or falling behind. Now he measured it differently, in mornings where no one rushed him out the door, in afternoons where he sat on bleachers instead of in offices, in evenings where dinner happened without checking a phone every 5 minutes. One day, while waiting for Leo at soccer practice, another parent sat beside him. "So what do?" the man asked. Jace paused, not because he was embarrassed, because he genuinely didn't know which version of himself to introduce. "I help people solve problems," he said finally. The man nodded. "That's vague." Jace smiled. It used to be complicated. On the field, Leo waved when he saw him, not because Jace had promised to be there, but because he always was. Charlie ran over after her dance class, hair messy, shoes in her hands. "Did you see me spin?" she asked. Jace nodded. every time, and for the first time, Jace realized something quietly powerful. No one here cared about his past titles. No one cared about his former influence. No one was impressed by what he used to be. They were only impressed by the fact that he showed up, and somehow that felt like the highest position he had ever held. Jace used to measure progress with numbers, growth percentages, market predictions that told him whether he was ahead or falling behind. Now he measured it differently, in mornings where no one rushed him out the door, in afternoons where he sat on bleachers instead of in offices, in evenings where dinner happened without checking a phone every 5 minutes. One day, while waiting for Leo at soccer practice, another parent sat beside him. "So, what do you do?" the man asked. Jace paused, not because he was embarrassed, because he genuinely didn't know which version of himself to introduce. "I help people solve problems," he said finally. The man nodded. "That's vague." Jace smiled. It used to be complicated. On the field, Leo waved when he saw him, not because Jace had promised to be there, but because he always was. Charlie ran over after her dance class, hair messy, shoes in her hands. "Did you see me spin?" she asked. Jace nodded. Every time, and for the first time, Jace realized something quietly powerful. No one here cared about his past titles. No one cared about his former influence. No one was impressed by what he used to be. They were only impressed by the fact that he showed up, and somehow that felt like the highest position he had ever held. The proof didn't come in a speech, it came in habits. Jace learned how to braid Charlie's hair without getting frustrated. He learned which cereal Leo secretly hated, and which one he only pretended to like. He learned how Estelle took her tea and when she preferred silence over conversation. These were not things you could outsource, not things you could rush, not things that impressed anyone outside the walls of their home, but they were the things that built belonging. One Saturday morning, they all ended up in the kitchen at the same time, barefoot, mismatched pajamas, music playing from Leo's phone. Jace burned the toast. Charlie laughed. Estelle stole a piece anyway. They ate standing up, leaning against counters, talking over each other about nothing important. And in that moment, Jace realized something he had never written into a goal or a plan. This was the life he used to postpone. This was the life he used to believe could wait until he was done becoming successful. But success had never been waiting for him at the end of ambition. It had been waiting for him at the table all along. Not in applause, not in recognition, not in numbers, but in the simple, unremarkable miracle of being part of a family that no longer feared his absence. And that was the only proof he needed that he had finally become the man he was supposed to be. The realization came on an ordinary afternoon. Jace was sitting in the school parking lot, waiting for the twins to come out. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't thinking about work. He was just there, watching other parents stand around with coffee cups and tired smiles. A man nearby was pacing, talking into his headset. Yeah, I'll call you back. I'm with my kid." Jace smiled to himself. That used to be him. Always with people, but never fully present. Always dividing his attention, always negotiating with moments instead of living inside them. The school doors opened. Leo ran out first, waving wildly. Charlie followed, nearly tripping over her backpack. They climbed into the car, talking at the same time, both trying to tell him about their day. Jace listened. Not half listened. Not nodded while thinking about something else. Actually listened. And that's when it hit him. There was no tension in his chest. No mental list of things waiting for him. No voice telling him he should be somewhere else. For the first time in his life, he wasn't choosing between who he was and who he wanted to be. They were finally the same person. Jace had spent years trying to change his circumstances, but the real transformation hadn't been external. It had been internal. He hadn't built a better life. He had built a better self, and that version of him didn't feel the need to run anymore. Estelle noticed it in the way Jace no longer rushed through moments. Not the big ones, not birthdays or school events, but the small, ordinary spaces where people usually reveal who they really are. He waited while she finished her stories instead of checking his phone. He sat at the table after dinner instead of standing up to handle something. He listened without interrupting, without solving, without drifting. One evening, they stood together in the kitchen washing dishes. The twins were in the living room building a fort out of pillows and blankets, laughing too loudly. Jace smiled at the noise. Estelle watched him for a moment before speaking. "You're not restless anymore," she said. Jace glanced at her. "Was I before?" She nodded. "Always. Even when you were here, part of you was somewhere else, thinking about what was next." "And now?" he asked. Estelle dried her hands and leaned against the counter. "Now you're settled, not bored, not stuck, just here." Jace thought about that. About how often he used to feel like stillness meant stagnation, how he believed movement was proof of progress. Now he understood something different. Stillness wasn't the absence of ambition. It was the presence of peace. Estelle reached for his hand without thinking about it, not as a test, not as a question, but as something natural. And that was when Jace knew she wasn't waiting for him anymore. She was finally living with him. The change showed up in what didn't happen. Weeks passed without Leo asking if Jace was going to work. Months went by without Charlie asking if he still lived with them. They stopped watching the door when he left the room, stopped asking who was calling his phone, stopped preparing themselves for goodbyes that never came. One afternoon, Jace realized something while sitting on the couch helping Leo with homework. Leo had made a mistake on a math problem. Jace pointed it out gently. "Oh," Leo said, "that's okay. You can help me fix it. Not Mom can help me. Not I'll wait until later. You." Charlie climbed onto Jace's lap with Sonny and fell asleep there without hesitation, the way children only do when they feel completely safe. Estelle watched from across the room, her heart tightening in a way that had nothing to do with fear. It was trust, not spoken, not negotiated, not promised, earned. Jace realized then that the most powerful moment in his transformation wasn't the day he rejected the offer. It was the day his children stopped questioning whether he would stay. Because children only stop asking when the answer has become obvious. And the answer, finally, was yes. Jace didn't feel like a hero. There was no moment where everything clicked into place with dramatic clarity. No sense of arrival, no final applause from the universe. What he felt was quieter. He felt ordinary. And for the first time in his life, that felt extraordinary. He stood in the backyard one evening, holding a garden hose while Leo tried to fill a small inflatable pool that kept tipping over. Charlie was nearby, splashing water everywhere, laughing at nothing in particular. Estelle sat on the steps, shaking her head at the mess but smiling anyway. Jace watched them and realized something that would have shocked his old self. He didn't miss the old life, not the hotels, not the meetings, not the sense of being important to people who forgot his name the moment he left the room. He used to think meaning came from impact, from how many people knew who you were, from how far your influence reached. Now he understood something different. Meaning came from consistency, from being the same person on good days and bad days, from showing up even when no one was watching. The world had wanted him to be impressive. His family wanted him to be present. And when he chose presence, everything else faded into background noise. Jace had spent half his life trying to become someone worth admiring. He had spent the other half learning how to become someone worth trusting. And standing there, soaked by a hose, laughing at the chaos he used to avoid, he finally knew which version of success would last. It was late when the house finally went quiet. Not the empty kind of quiet Jace used to come home to, the kind that echoed and reminded him how alone success could feel. This quiet was warm, layered with soft breathing from 2 bedrooms down the hall and the faint hum of the dishwasher finishing its cycle. Jace stood in the doorway of Leo and Charlie's room for a moment, watching them sleep. Leo was sprawled sideways, one arm hanging off the bed. Charlie had rolled onto her stomach, Sonny tucked under her chin like always. Jace felt something settle in his chest. Not relief, not pride, certainty. There was no countdown in his head, no mental checklist of things he still needed to achieve. No voice telling him this moment was temporary. For the first time, his life didn't feel like something he was passing through on the way to somewhere else. It felt like something he was meant to stay inside. He walked back into the living room where Estelle was folding a blanket on the couch. "They asleep?" she asked. Out cold, he smiled. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder the way she used to, but this time without hesitation, without calculation, without fear of what tomorrow might take away. Jace looked at her, and now? He didn't need to. His life had already answered for him. He had broken the pattern, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming consistent. Not by proving anything to the world, but by staying long enough to prove something to the people who mattered. Jace McLaughlin had once built an empire from nothing, but the only thing that ever truly felt like success was the life he chose not to walk away from. If this story touched you, take a moment to like this video so it reaches more people who need to hear it. Share it with someone who's chasing success and might need a reminder of what really matters. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Williams Storytime, where we tell stories that don't just entertain, they stay with you. Before you go, leave a comment. What does success mean to you now, after this story? Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about how far we go, but about why we finally choose to stay.